Welcome to Around Town, featuring what's happening here in the greater Concord area. I'm your host, Dick Patton, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back today. And as we get ready to say goodbye to February and welcome to March, and it's, March is the March winds. That's always famous. I heard about that. Then, of course, you've got the Ides of March, which I thought at one time it was a rock and roll group. Come find out it's not. It's something about Julius Caesar. And baseball. Baseball is on its way. But with me today, I have a very special guest, Attorney Penny Dean, who is here with us to talk. And I think, Penny, you're probably one of the first attorneys I've had come in, because usually if they've come in, they're running for public office or something. So you're here not to just talk about the trade, what's new, because, as a former legislator and of course city council too, but especially the legislature, there are so many laws passed that the common public would never know about.
Common lawyer doesn't know about it.
No, I mean, unless the newspapers give it something that's really controversial, you'd never hear nothing about it. It just gets printed in the books, and that's it.
That's exactly it, and people are held to task for them.
Yeah.
And I have people who call me all the time to hire me about a certain matter, and I say, well, I'm going to have to do some research, and they go, research? You're a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah. And they go, well, you do this type of law all the time, and I go, yeah. And you'd think, I said, none of us know everything.
No.
And I explained to them that the law is so complex, and cases are decided every day.
Oh, I know.
That, every day, and it changes how things are interpreted.
Yeah.
And so there used to be a joke my dad said, it is not he who passed the law that's the giver of law. It's he who interpreteth the law that's the giver of the law.
Yeah.
Meaning the legislature thinks they make the laws.
Yeah.
But we have judges that interpret them in ways that there are people like me that think that's not what the legislature intended, that's not the common meaning. But as I explain to people, I don't wear a black robe.
No.
And so therefore the person in the black robe decides how that law is going to be interpreted and what the law says.
Yeah.
And the problem that I see even more so is that we don't have what we call civics or social studies truly offered in our high schools anymore, or our junior highs. And so students are not getting the civic education they need. They're not understanding our government. They're not understanding their rights, most importantly to me.
Yeah. I took civics, and I think it was back those days. 9th grade in Concord was at Rodman Junior High School. The 9th grade wasn't moved up to the high school until, oh boy, I think it was around the late 80s, early 90s maybe. Because back then it was we were down there, because I can remember being in the 9th grade, we could wear the boys could start wearing the maroon gym shorts. So we thought we were a big deal. We don't have to wear the blues anymore. We don't wear the maroons. But so I remember taking civics, and I'm pretty sure it was in 9th grade. And I think Mr. Wilson was my civics teacher. I thought it was very interesting. But they only offered it that one time.
It's not only that, I think it's a combination of two things, and parents bear huge responsibility here as well.
Yeah.
Is that families don't have what I call family dinner. Our family always had family dinner, and even if there was extracurricular activities by any of my brother or my sister, you would still either come early or come late to family dinner, and we would all have dialogue about what was going on in the world during the day, what we learned at school, everything. And parents don't have those conversations with their kids.
No, they don't.
And I am shocked at the amount of educated adults that have no concept about their constitutional and civil rights. No concept.
Yep.
And my biggest issue, at least that comes to me, is people don't understand about the right against self-incrimination. And particularly the right not to speak. Because people talk about the First Amendment, which of course is the right to speak.
Yeah.
But what's equally important is the right not to speak, the right not to answer questions. And I tell people all the time, if they're in an interaction with law enforcement is asking them questions usually because they believe they did something wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And if they believe they did something wrong, you have to stop and say, why would I give them any more information?
Sure.
And people think, well, if I cooperate and I'm nice to them, everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And I say, well, if you quote unquote cooperate and are nice to them, what you're doing is signing your own complaint.
Yeah.
And so I liken it to people say to me, well, you know, I don't want to make them angry. And I look at it, if I get a dinner invitation, I can say, no, thank you. I don't want to go to dinner at this place.
Sure.
And so when people are stopped by the police, I always tell them the first thing they should say is, you know, why am I being detained? And you have to be like a 2-year-old with ice cream. You ever see a 2-year-old that wants ice cream?
Yeah.
You tell them, well, here's the puppy. I want ice cream. Oh, look at this nice little toy. I want ice cream. They are single-minded. They want ice cream. And so you have to be like that. You have to be, why am I being stopped? And I always tell people, never raise your voice. Never shout at them. Always be polite.
Yeah.
But literally, until they answer that question, you know, I want to know why I'm being detained.
Sure.
And if they say to me, well, don't you know why? I'll say, no, I'm asking you the question. You know, I don't know the answer, and that's why I'm asking you to please tell me.
Yeah.
Because if they don't give you a reason, the next thing is, am I free to go now? Because you want to make your interaction as short with them as possible and give them as little information as possible.
Yeah.
You know, and I tell people, and you have to literally ask, am I free to go now, repeatedly.
Sure.
Until they answer the question, because they're going to keep trying to bring you back into the dialogue and ask you questions.
Sure.
You know, and I liken that to if someone asks you what you had for breakfast, well, it's none of their business. And so you politely say, well, gee, why would you want to know that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And people, so all the time, and I particularly see this incident when someone's had a self-defense incident. Let's say a person has felt threatened and they had to display a firearm, or maybe even had to point a firearm.
Yeah.
And the mere act of doing that, the state has likened it to be deadly force, which if it's used unlawfully is a felony.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that are surprised where they say, but I didn't point the firearm at them, I just displayed the firearm or showed them I had a firearm. But what I tell people in that type of situation, if you're afraid enough that you have to warn someone off of the firearm, there's a lot of physiological phenomena that are happening that most people don't understand because they don't deal with it every day.
Yeah.
You know, there's what's called auditory exclusion. And what that means is you're so focused on the threat, the person you think that's a threat to you, that you don't hear other things going on around you.
No.
The next thing is what's called tunnel vision, because you believe this person is a threat. You're focused, laser focused on them, and you're not seeing things even 2 or 3 foot to the side of you. And the reason all of this is important, and there's other physiological phenomena that happen as well, things that cause you to lose your fine motor coordination. And so when you lose your fine motor coordination, if you're asked to get your driver's license, you might appear to be drunk because you're going to be scared, you're going to be trembling. And so you're going to get an accusation maybe of consumed alcohol when you haven't. But the reason I tell people that this is important to know their rights and important not to speak to the police in situations like this is because you're going to appear to be a liar. You know, they're going to say, well, didn't you hear your wife who's sitting next to you tell you this or that? And you're going to say, well, gee, I never heard any such a thing. And your wife, who's been separated from you, let's say, is talking to another police officer, and she's saying, well, I told him, blah, blah, blah. And if you say, well, I didn't hear anything, that makes you look like a liar. And all those things can be used against you later. And so what happens is the police, they're very skillful at doing this, and I tell people, just watch the TV shows.
Oh, yeah.
You know how they pull the information out of you? They come and they say, well, gee, we're just trying to figure out what happened. And people aren't concerned yet because they said, well, they're not arresting me.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they're not arresting you is because then they're obligated, you're in what's called custody, they're obligated to give you the Miranda warning.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that says anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Yeah.
And sometimes when people hear that, they get nervous, right? And then they won't talk anymore. So what the police want to do is get as much information out of them as they can without having to give them their constitutional rights.
Sure.
And so that makes it very difficult for the honest citizen to defend themselves later. Because you have all these statements that you haven't had time to think about. I liken it to writing a very important letter and sending your first draft out. Who would do that? I mean, nobody would. You know, an important letter, you're going to edit and maybe be the 5th or 6th draft.
Sure.
You know, and it isn't because you're lying or mistaking things, you're just rethinking and choosing your words more carefully. And so I liken that And the reason I tell people this is because if you are ever involved in a situation where you're stopped by the police, or even if you're in a self-defense situation, the minute that happens, you should call an attorney right away. And I always tell people, they say right away, I said absolutely. I've had clients when they're pulled over, they don't even know why they're pulled over, literally have me on speed dial, and I talk to the officer, he puts me on speakerphone, and it's like, well, why would a person, innocent person, have a lawyer on speed dial? I said, why does a healthy person have a doctor?
Yeah.
Because they might need them someday.
Exactly right.
You know, and so I look at that and I go, okay, there are cases where students are taught anymore. The police are coming in the schools. They have different names for them, but we have police officers in the school now. They have different, you know, that literally are employed and paid by the school, even though they're a sworn police officer, and they're in the school every day.
Sure.
And the students are taught to tell them everything. But worse, yes, they see police dogs searching their lockers and they're ordered to open their lockers. And so they're taught really from the beginning to give up their Fourth Amendment rights, their Fifth Amendment rights. They call them sometimes school resource officers.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's one of the most horrible things that we've done for just desecrating what civil rights and what constitutional rights we have left. Because these students are brought up to just give in and, oh, you have to do this, as opposed to being taught, no, you don't have to do this. There's always choices, there's always consequences, but you shouldn't have to allow that. And if you do, then maybe we should choose a different school, or maybe we should choose a different method of education.
Sure.
You know, because think about it, these students are learning by example that they are just to give up those rights.
Yeah.
And later, when they understand the implications of what they've given up, they're shocked. You know, because didn't they teach you about the 3 different branches of government when you were in school?
Oh, yeah.
You ask, you know, even adults to name the 3 separate branches of government, they can't do that anymore.
No, they don't know.
You know, they don't understand the elective process. There are people that don't know what the electoral college is.
No, I know it.
You know, and so
No.
I go back to the fact that, you know, when I tell people from the very beginning that they think it's a bunch of dry old reading, but literally I tell them to read the Constitution, read the Bill of Rights. How many people do you think have read that?
Yeah, not many, I'm sure.
Yeah, they don't, and it should be assigned as part of law or high school and junior high curriculum.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those things where I look at it and I go, why aren't they teaching that? But more importantly, why aren't more people inquiring about that? Why aren't parents inquiring about that?
Yeah.
I mean, do you find parents less involved in their children's education than they used to be?
Oh, definitely. I think so.
Yeah, it's...
I know myself when I was in school that, you know, especially in junior high school, they put me up into the college group in 8th grade. My parents were totally out of it. They didn't understand I didn't understand it. They had more than math. What the heck is more than math? I had arithmetic, which I did very well in, but in 8th grade, more than math was like the next thing to algebra.
Wow.
Well, how would I know that? You know, 8 times z, or 12 times x and y or something. Oh, what do those stand for, you know? So it was very difficult back those days because they never had that stuff. And, you know, it's a very complex, I think. And now it's even worse because now the kids have computers at 3 years old. That's very sad to see a 3-year-old sitting down at a laptop. And I don't even know half of what to do at my age. You know, it's disgusting.
I joke, when you get a new cell phone, you want it programmed and
Yeah.
hand it to a 4-year-old. They'll get it to you
Oh,
in 2 seconds.
yes. I mean, they know what to do. Not me. Oh, it's just terrible, but that's the way it is. That's where this country's gotten to.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, like learning cursive, I read recently in the paper, in some towns, they're having a debate about whether or not cursive should be taught.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that it was at that point that I felt really old, because I presumed that cursive was being taught every day, everywhere, that was just one of the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely shocked to find out that it was considered not usable. You know, and I use electronic tools as much as anyone, or at least I think I do, but I still find a need for cursive occasionally. And so, and I still take notes in longhand, sometimes on a computer, but still, to not know how to write cursive, which means you don't know how to read it then. If you don't know how to write it, you probably don't know how to read it.
No.
And there's still huge amounts of historical and legal and important documents written in cursive that the question is, will those students not be able to read them?
Yeah, sure.
And it goes back to the education, but I think one of the points that I still want to make is that when people are stopped by law enforcement, by the police, really you need to look at that as a very scary scenario for you, because there's going to be consequences almost always from that stop. And especially, more importantly, if they come to your door. And this is where people get tricked all the time.
Yeah.
I tell them, when the police knock on your door, they're not there to give you a birthday present.
No.
They're not there to say, Publishers Clearinghouse, here's a check.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
They're there because they think that they can get information out of you, or you've done something bad, or you know of someone who's done something bad.
Sure.
And so the first thing I tell people is to have a storm door and a front door. Because if you have a storm door, you can keep it locked at all times.
Yeah.
Have a storm and a glass through it, and you can open up the storm glass and talk through the screen. So I've had clients, the police say, we'd like to talk to you. Great, we're talking.
Yeah.
And the implication is they want to come in and talk.
Yeah.
And I tell people at that point, if the police are at your door, you should be calling your attorney, putting them on speakerphone so they can identify themselves, and ask the police to call the attorney and see what they want to talk about.
Sure.
Because even the most innocuous information that you think you're giving to the police, I tell people, they're not there to have tea and crumpets.
No.
They're not there to ask you how your garden's doing. They're there for specific information, and they're going to start asking you about that specific information. And you don't realize it, but whatever they're asking you about, they think is valuable to their case. And I always say, if they think it's good for them, it's going to be bad for you more than likely. That it's going to in some way implicate you.
Oh, sure.
And the other thing, and I think this is a larger issue, and it segues right back to what you talked about in the beginning of the show, is that people don't know all of the things that are illegal.
No.
There are things that they have no clue.
No.
You got to be kidding me, that's illegal.
Yeah.
For example, I tell people, read the paper, pick a paper. How often do you see people charged with resisting arrest?
Yeah.
Every day, right?
Yeah.
And even when they're not arrested for anything else, the police can still charge you with resisting arrest, even if they weren't arresting you for anything. Wrap your head around that for a second. You go, wait a minute here. Because if they tell you you're under arrest, if you do something as simple as moving your arm away,
Yeah.
that's considered resisting arrest.
That's something.
Because you're pulling your arm away
Sure.
when they're trying to arrest you. So I tell people, if you're going to be arrested, never ever offer any physical resistance, because you can still go through the process and litigate it later. But even an unlawful arrest, an illegal arrest, you have to comply with. So I tell people to put your arms out and say, okay, I'm going to cooperate. Don't say anything else, but literally, if the police say to move left or right, you just follow those instructions. And the bottom line is, we can go in court and we can litigate it later and we can debate it later, but beside the road is not the time to debate it.
No.
And they've even had a gentleman, I read an article the other day and I was like, holy crap. The person who was being arrested had a cup of coffee in his hand. So he thought it made sense to set the cup of coffee down because he's going to get handcuffed, right? And they charged him with resisting arrest because he moved his hand to set the coffee down. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I believe the outcome of that case, and I don't remember the town where it was, I believe the outcome is, fortunately, he was found not guilty, because they determined it was reasonable for him to set the cup of liquid, I think it was coffee, down before he offered his hands, because it'd be kind of silly to have someone handcuffed carrying a cup of coffee around.
Yeah.
But that is the extent to which they will charge people just to charge them with something. And the average person is really puzzled. It isn't that they're trying to break the law, they're saying, you're kidding me. If I even move to the left or to the right, that's considered resisting arrest? And who would ever think that?
I know. You'd be surprised.
Now, when you were in the legislature, how many new laws were passed a year?
Well, quite a few. I mean, well, I don't say quite a few, but there was a few, depending on which area that they went through. I mean, transportation. I mean, different. Like transportation might get 5 or 6 if you're lucky to get through. Judicial. You would have some, or you had agriculture. It all depended basically what
Committee you're on.
committee you're on. Some of them would get, well, actually, the ones that were, what they call, I can't remember what they called them. The ones that you did a roll call vote on, or voted voice-wise. There was some that they called, oh boy, this is where I'm really getting old. Like I said, I always
Consent calendar, are you thinking?
Yeah, it was yes, consent calendar. Those that went on consent calendar were automatically, basically, voted. So, so you had quite a few of those, unless somebody pulled it off consent and then had to be debated in the House. But it could be very confusing for a lot of people, because unless you're paying attention, they could pass things without you even knowing it. But then, of course, it goes to the Senate. They chew it over, and then if they pass it, it goes to the governor. If they don't, it comes back to the House, and then they have to have a committee on conference to iron out the differences, and then go on to the governor. It's amazing how much you learn being a legislator. I can tell you, I was surprised when I was put in. I was on fishing game the first 2 years. It was very interesting. But then I went on transportation the next 6 years, and I really loved transportation. But it was just a real different way of looking. And then, of course, judicial. I was on judicial for a year, I think I was, and that was another ball game that was different. Now they wanted to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples' Day or some.
Yeah, Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Yeah. Jesus. Just call it New Hampshire Day, or something simple that everybody can understand. But no, a lot of people wouldn't understand those laws. I mean, I certainly wouldn't understand some of them, especially like in transportation. They had cars. They had something different parts on a car. Say like some were made by the manufacturer or some were made by somebody else. Could you tell the difference? It was very interesting. I couldn't tell the difference, but you had to really look at it or pound it or whatever, hit it or something to really tell the difference. So if somebody got in an accident and they wanted to replace that certain part, and they put this piece on versus the other piece that probably would be better, who would know?
You have to be proactive. I can tell you that unfortunately I've had a couple telephone poles walk right out in front of the rear of my truck when I was backing up. So I've had to have my truck repaired a couple times.
Yeah.
And I was very careful to get what's called OEM, which is original manufactured parts. I spoke with my insurance company and the repair service and said, look, I don't want aftermarket parts on my car. And the issue is that a lot of them are cheaper. So some insurance companies want to put them on because they're cheaper.
That's it, yeah.
Some will try and say they're made to higher specs, and my answer is that may be the case, but I'll take the original manufacturer's parts.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. The thing that I tell people is that I every year read what's called the LSRs, the Legislative Service Request, which is just basically usually a one-line title and maybe a couple sentences, a snippet of what the bill is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
And every year there's generally about 1,000 new bills, or every session I should say.
Yeah.
There's about 1,000 bills offered.
Oh, yeah.
LSRs, Legislative Service
yeah.
Requests, which become bills.
Yeah.
just to read the snippet, not the entire bill, but just to
Oh,
read the
yeah,
snippet and go
yeah.
through them generally takes me hours and
Oh,
hours
it
and hours.
does. Yeah, it does.
And people say, why do I want to devote that time? And the answer is, I devote it because every year out of 1,000, based on the titles, there'll be about 100 that I think may be of concern to me.
Mm.
And then when it boils down, they'll probably be down to 20.
Mm.
You know, for example, this year we've had probably the most anti-firearm, anti-freedom bills that I have seen in 23 years here.
Oh, I bet.
You know, there's just a huge amount. And so I say to the average person, you know, one of the things that you can do with your children or whoever is take a gander at them.
Mm.
Because the bottom line is you're going to be bound by some of those.
Oh, yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and take them to the State House. Have them participate. Have them think. Sometimes just listening to debate,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
you learn a lot.
Mm.
You know, you learn both sides, and even if you don't agree with someone, you may learn a lot from their position. And
yeah, it's true.
it's also a very tedious and time-consuming process. A couple weeks ago, we had 4 anti-firearm bills heard at the State House. I arrived at the State House about 8:30 that morning. I left at 7 p.m. that night.
Oh, I bet.
And I had time for lunch, barely time for lunch.
Mm.
I got to go down to the cafeteria, stand in line for 20 minutes and
Yeah.
get a little lunch.
Yeah.
And I still came back late, missing one. And sometimes bills run over, so you have to choose.
Sure.
You know, I'm sure you had
Oh,
that,
yeah,
juggling
sure.
committees.
Yeah.
And are you glad you served in the State House for a period of
Oh,
time?
I still wanted to. Unfortunately, you know, I didn't have the money, and there was a group out there that was out to get anybody older than 40 years old out of office.
Oh, wow.
And being 66, that meant I was one of them.
Yep.
And so the one who beat me, got paid, her whole thing was paid for. She didn't have to pay a nickel. Well, I know he's waving me out, and so we've got to call it a day, but I'd love to have you come back on, Penny. I know there's tons of things that we could talk about, and if you're up to it, we can plan to come in every so often and talk some more. I think it's very interesting. So.
Me as well. Thank you. I always learn from talking to other people.
Yeah, no, by all
Thank
means.
you.
So, we've been talking with Attorney Penny Dean, and if you have any questions, you can give her a call, and we'll look forward to having her come on again very soon. And so, with that in mind, have a great day. Thank you to Director Brian Blackton, and have a great day. We'll see you all soon on Around Town. I'm your host, Dick.